The little cafe sat on a quiet corner of the street, with sunlight streaming through its large windows in the morning and casting golden stripes across the wooden floor. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air, mixing with the soft hum of chatter and clinking cups. It was a cozy place where people came to escape for a while, to sip a warm drink, read a book, or watch the world go by. Behind the counter, she moved with a quiet, steady rhythm. She had worked there for a few years, and the routine had become second nature. She poured coffee, wiped the counters, and carried plates with a careful balance that spoke of her experience. Her hands were steady and precise, yet there was a gentle grace in the way she moved. Most people saw her only as the waitress, someone to take their orders and smile politely, but she carried something within her that few noticed. When the cafe was empty or slow, she would sometimes pause by the corner where the old piano sat. It was a beautiful instrument, its wood polished from years of use, its keys worn but still shining. Many customers barely gave it a glance. To them, it was just decoration, part of the cozy atmosphere. But to her, it was a friend, a companion that had been with her through quiet nights, stressful days, and lonely moments. She loved music more than anything. When she played, the world faded away. The worries of the day, the tiredness in her arms, the stress of dealing with rude customers. It all disappeared. The piano didn't judge. It didn't care that she was just a waitress or that her hands sometimes trembled with nervousness. When her fingers touched the keys, it felt like magic, like speaking without words, like letting her soul breathe. But she rarely played for anyone else. Sometimes she thought about it, imagined lifting her fingers and letting music fill the small cafe while people listened, and maybe they would see her for who she really was. But then she would shake the thought away. People didn't expect her to play. They didn't expect anything more than coffee, smiles, and quiet service. And she wasn't sure if they were ready to hear the music that lived inside her. The morning began quietly, with only a few regulars sitting at the corner tables. One elderly man sipped his tea and read the newspaper, occasionally nodding politely at her as she refilled his cup. A young woman worked on her laptop, headphones in, completely absorbed in her screen. The bell above the door jingled as a few more customers arrived, and the usual rhythm of the cafe continued. She moved around them, taking orders, bringing drinks, and keeping the small space tidy. She liked these moments, the calm before the rush, when the air was still and the smell of coffee hung warmly. It gave her a chance to breathe, to imagine the notes she would play if she could just touch the piano. Sometimes she would imagine the music floating through the air, reaching the ears of strangers, making them pause and smile without knowing why. That was the kind of magic she wanted to share, even if she had never dared. But today felt different, though she didn't know why at first. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the piano, highlighting its polished curves, or maybe it was just the quiet hum of the morning. She noticed it, a gentle pull in her chest, a small nudge that whispered to her. The music inside her stirred, not loudly, not urgently, but just enough to make her stop for a moment and imagine the sound of it filling the room. She shook her head softly, trying to push the feeling aside. There were orders to take, tables to clear, coffee to serve. She could not let herself get lost in daydreams now. She smiled at a customer who waved and moved to refill a cup, hiding the flutter in her chest. And yet, the thought of playing lingered, like a faint, persistent melody she couldn't ignore. The cafe started to fill as the morning progressed. A group of young people came in, laughing and joking loudly, their voices carrying across the small room. They settled at a large table near the piano, their eyes curious as they glanced at the instrument. One of them tapped a finger on the edge of the keys as if testing a rhythm. She felt a small knot in her stomach, the tug of unease mixing with the stir of music she had felt earlier. They looked at her as she approached with menus, their expressions a mixture of amusement and disbelief. She noticed the slight smirks, the way they exchanged glances, and she felt a familiar nervousness creep in. It wasn't the first time people had underestimated her. She was used to being overlooked, dismissed, or quietly ignored. But today there was something different in the air. The music inside her pushed a little harder, urging her to notice the moment, to recognize that maybe this was the day she could not hide anymore. As she took their orders, she felt the pull stronger. Each step she took toward the counter, each word she spoke, carried a quiet courage she hadn't felt in a long time. The piano seemed to hum softly in her mind, its keys calling her by name. She realized, with a mixture of fear and excitement, that she wanted to play. Not just for herself, but for them. For anyone willing to listen, even if they didn't know it yet. For a moment, she imagined the music spilling into the room, the laughter fading, the soft notes wrapping around the corners, reaching into the hearts of the people she served. She imagined the change in their expressions, the pause in their chatter, the surprise and wonder in their eyes. It was a delicate vision, fragile and uncertain, but it brought a warmth to her chest. She took a deep breath and let her hands brush against the counter, grounding herself in the reality of the moment. Orders were placed, drinks were poured, plates were cleared. Life in the cafe moved forward, but inside her, a quiet storm of courage and anticipation swirled. The music was ready. She was ready, even if she didn't yet know how it would be received. The group of young people laughed again, louder this time, as they noticed her pause near the piano. One of them leaned over and whispered to the others, glancing at her with a teasing look. The words were soft but clear enough. "Play for us? You?" The mockery was light, almost playful, but it struck her ears sharply. A rush of heat filled her face, and for a moment, she froze. Yet beneath the embarrassment, beneath the urge to retreat, something else rose. The music inside her answered the challenge silently, urging her forward. She looked at the piano, then at the group, then back again. The sunlight glinted on the polished keys, almost as if urging her to take the leap. The small pull in her chest had grown into a quiet insistence. It was time to stop hiding, time to let the music speak for her. She swallowed her nervousness, straightened her shoulders, and made her way toward the piano. She noticed small details as she played, the way the sunlight hit the keys, glinting off the polished surface, the faint smile on the elderly man's face, the glimmer of surprise and admiration in the eyes of the young people who had doubted her. Each small reaction fueled her confidence, and the music flowed more freely, more boldly. The nervousness that had gripped her earlier faded into a warm, steady confidence. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the cafe, forgot the customers, even forgot herself. There was only the music, only the sound rising from the piano, only the connection it created. Her heart soared with each note, each chord, each gentle, flowing melody. It was a moment of pure expression, of freedom, of joy. The music was no longer a secret. It was a gift shared, a bridge between her and everyone in the room. The young group, once mocking and dismissive, now exchanged looks of quiet wonder. They had come expecting amusement, perhaps entertainment at her expense. But what they found was a revelation. One of them leaned back slowly, taking in the melody with wide eyes. Another whispered softly, almost to themselves, "I didn't think. She's incredible." There was a shift in the energy at the table, a newfound respect and admiration that couldn't be denied. She felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely different from anything she had experienced before. It wasn't about applause or recognition, though she could see the beginnings of it in the smiles and quiet conversations around the room. It was about the connection, about touching people in a way that went beyond words, beyond appearances. The piano had allowed her to express herself fully, and in return, the room had responded, openly and sincerely. As the melody continued, she felt the initial teasing melt completely. The music had turned doubt into appreciation, ridicule into admiration. The young group's smirks and whispers had vanished, replaced by attentive listening and quiet acknowledgement. She could sense their minds opening, their assumptions dissolving, and a new understanding forming. It was a powerful moment, one that reminded her of why she had loved music all her life. The cafe itself seemed transformed. The usual hum of conversation had quieted, replaced by a gentle reverence for the music filling the space. Regular customers, new faces, and even the staff were drawn in, experiencing the moment together. The young group, initially mocking and loud, was now part of a silent, shared appreciation. The music had crossed the boundaries of expectation, reaching everyone in the room, creating a shared, human experience that was as fleeting as it was unforgettable. She continued to play, feeling the rhythm, the melody, and the emotion flowing naturally from her. The piano had become an extension of herself, a voice for her thoughts and feelings, a way to communicate without speaking. Every note told a story, every chord carried emotion, every pause invited reflection. And as she played, she realized that the courage she had found in this moment was something she could carry with her beyond the cafe, beyond the music, beyond even the doubts that had once held her back. By the time the last note faded, there was a moment of silence in the cafe. No one moved immediately, no one spoke. The air was thick with the emotion of the performance, the shared experience of having witnessed something beautiful and unexpected. Slowly, one by one, small sounds of appreciation began. A soft clap, a whispered compliment, a murmur of admiration. The young group, once mocking and dismissive, now smiled and nodded, their expressions full of newfound respect. For her, the experience was transformative. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and fear, and she had played anyway. She had shared a part of herself that had been hidden for years, and in return, she had received acknowledgement, admiration, and connection. The music had lifted the room, changed perceptions, and allowed her to step into a space where her talent and passion could be recognized. The moment marked a turning point, not just in the day, but in her life. The teasing, the doubt, and the initial snickers had been replaced by understanding and respect. She had discovered that courage, once found, could transform even the smallest of spaces into something remarkable. And as she sat at the piano, feeling the final resonance of the notes, she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey where her music could touch hearts, break down barriers, and lift spirits in ways she had never imagined. The music filled the cafe, wrapping around every table, every chair, every quiet corner of the small space. It was no longer tentative or cautious. It had grown into something confident, something alive. Her fingers danced over the keys with a freedom she had never allowed herself before. The melody was flowing, lifting the weight of nervousness and fear, carrying her into a place where only the music mattered. The young group who had laughed and teased now sat completely still, eyes fixed on her hands. Their earlier amusement had vanished, replaced by awe. They leaned forward slightly, unconsciously mimicking the rhythm she played, drawn into the music in a way they hadn't anticipated. Each note she struck seemed to touch a different part of their attention, capturing their focus and softening their skepticism. The cafe's regulars, who had been going about their morning quietly, now watched in wonder. The woman with the laptop had removed her headphones entirely, listening as though the music had pulled her out of the digital world and into something real and tangible. The elderly man had a gentle smile, his eyes closed, swaying slightly in his chair as though he had been carried along by a memory long buried in the notes. She didn't notice the audience anymore. She didn't notice their expressions or the small gasps of surprise. She only noticed the piano beneath her hands and the music rising naturally, telling its story. It was as if the instrument had always been waiting for this moment, for her to finally allow it to speak. The melody carried layers of emotion. The joy of discovery, the quiet ache of longing, and the gentle power of persistence. The young group shifted again, this time with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. One of them whispered softly to another, "I didn't think. She's really good." Another nodded silently, his eyes wide as he followed the movement of her fingers. The teasing was gone, replaced with something like respect or maybe humility. She could sense their change even though she did not look up. The music was saying everything she could not put into words. As she played, she allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back for years. The small, unspoken frustrations of being underestimated, the quiet longing to be seen for more than just a waitress, the secret dreams she had kept tucked away. Every note carried a piece of her heart, and the piano transformed it into something tangible, something beautiful. It was a private vulnerability made public, and yet it felt safe, accepted, and alive. The cafe seemed to pause for a moment, though life continued as usual around her. The young group, still seated near the piano, leaned back in their chairs, exchanging amused glances. Their laughter had faded, replaced by an expectant silence. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of curiosity, doubt, and barely disguised amusement. She felt a flutter in her stomach, a nervous knot that tightened with every heartbeat. The question hung in the air, teasing and challenging her. "Play for us? You?" She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys. The keys felt smooth under her touch, familiar and comforting. Yet today they seemed to hum with a different energy, almost as if they sensed the tension in the room. The piano had always been her refuge, her secret companion, but now it was about to be something more. The very thought made her pulse quicken. The group whispered among themselves, not loudly, but enough for her to catch fragments. "I wonder if she can even play," one of them said, smirking. "She's just a waitress. Maybe she can tap a few notes, but that's it." Another laughed softly, nudging the first. "This will be funny." The teasing was light, playful even, but there was a sting in it. It reminded her of the countless times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked. Her hands trembled slightly, but she drew a deep breath and centered herself. She reminded herself why she loved music, why the piano had been her constant friend. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong, though the thought was tempting. It was about sharing a part of herself, letting the music speak when words could not. Slowly, she let her fingers settle on the keys, feeling their familiar grooves beneath her touch. The first note rang out softly, delicate and tentative. It filled the small corner of the cafe with a fragile sound, almost hesitant, like a whisper reaching out to test the waters. The group froze, a flicker of surprise crossing their faces. They hadn't expected that. Some leaned forward slightly, curious despite themselves, while others exchanged uncertain glances. The elderly man reading the newspaper paused mid-sip, a faint smile touching his lips as the note reached him. Encouraged, she played another note, then another, letting the melody grow naturally, cautiously at first. Her nerves were still there, but with each sound, they began to fade. The music seemed to weave around the room, brushing against the walls and softening the edges of the cafe. The group's amusement shifted subtly, replaced by attention, then curiosity. They couldn't deny that something was happening. Something real, something moving. She let her hands move more confidently, the notes flowing in a gentle, heartfelt rhythm. She didn't plan it. It simply came, guided by the years she had spent practicing in secret, by the countless hours alone with the piano when no one was watching. The melody carried a quiet emotion, a softness that made people pause and take notice. The group's initial smirks faded further as they began to listen more closely, their earlier laughter now a distant memory. A few customers in the background looked up from their coffee, drawn by the unexpected sound. A woman working on her laptop removed her headphones, glancing toward the piano. The elderly man folded his newspaper completely, resting his hands on the table, captivated by the unexpected performance. Even the barista in the back stopped mid-task, watching with wide eyes as the music unfolded. The group of young people shifted in their seats, their expressions changing. Some leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on her hands as they danced over the keys. Others exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that perhaps they had been wrong to doubt her. The teasing had vanished, replaced by an almost reverent curiosity. They had expected something small, maybe a clumsy attempt, but what they heard was something entirely different. Something moving, authentic, and impossible to ignore. She could feel a change in the room, a subtle transformation that made her heart beat faster. The music wasn't just filling the cafe, it was touching people. The notes seemed to reach inside, brushing against memories, hopes, and quiet emotions. Even the regulars, accustomed to her calm presence, felt it. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. Others whispered softly to each other, unable to resist commenting on the unexpected beauty of the sound. The young group was silent now, their earlier confidence replaced by awe. The girl who had whispered the mocking question moments ago stared at her hands, unblinking, as if trying to understand how someone so quiet, so unassuming, could produce something so moving. The others were equally captivated, leaning toward the piano, caught in the spell of a performance they hadn't expected and couldn't look away from. She noticed the subtle changes in their posture, the way their bodies relaxed, the slight widening of their eyes, the softening of their expressions. The music had done what words could not. It had transformed doubt into appreciation, teasing into wonder. She felt a surge of courage and pride, a deep satisfaction that this moment, this shared experience, was real. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about connection, about letting the music speak for her, and it was working. Her fingers moved with more freedom now, the melody growing richer, more confident. She allowed herself to play with emotion, with pauses and crescendos, with the natural ebb and flow that came from the heart. She had never performed for strangers before, not like this, and yet the music felt alive, responding to the room, responding to her. The cafe, the customers, the laughter and whispers. They all became part of the moment, part of the music that rose from her fingertips. The atmosphere shifted further. The laughter and chatter that had filled the cafe earlier were replaced by a quiet attentiveness. People leaned back in their chairs, some resting their heads on their hands, some sitting forward, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of the performance. Even the young group, who had mocked her at first, was now silent, caught in the spell of the melody. The teasing had disappeared entirely. There was only music and the reaction it inspired. The melody swelled, growing richer, more intricate. Her hands moved quickly, but with precision, gliding over the keys with a sense of grace that seemed effortless. The young group leaned back slightly, no longer attempting to hide their astonishment. They exchanged subtle glances, acknowledging silently that they had misjudged her. Their earlier laughter had been replaced with quiet amazement. They were witnessing something rare, something unexpected, and it was impossible to ignore. She noticed the way the cafe seemed to transform around her. The sunlight streaming through the windows now appeared warmer, brighter, as if responding to the music. The clinking of cups and plates had ceased. Even the barista behind the counter had stopped, frozen in attention. The entire room had been swept into the current of her performance. Caught in the ripple of emotion she had unleashed, her fingers moved over the keys in a way that felt instinctive, almost as if the piano were guiding her. She did not need to think about the notes. She only needed to feel them, to allow them to flow from her heart into the space around her. Every chord carried a story. Every pause held a breath of emotion. Every rise and fall of the melody communicated a part of her soul. The group of young people, once mocking and confident, now looked at her with eyes wide and faces softened. The boy who had leaned back, smirking at the beginning, now whispered, "I didn't know someone like her could play like this." Another nodded, adding quietly, "It's amazing." Their words were hushed, but their sincerity shone through, and she felt it, even without turning to see them. She began to experiment slightly, letting the music flow into new patterns, exploring its rhythm and depth. The notes rose and fell, quickened and slowed, creating a story that was uniquely hers. She could hear the responses from the room, the gentle sighs, the quiet murmurs, the small applause that had begun at the back. The music had transformed the space, making it more than a cafe. It was a place of shared emotion, a living, breathing moment suspended in time. Her heart began to swell with joy, a pure, unfiltered delight at being able to share this part of herself. She realized that for so long she had hidden her music, afraid of judgment or mockery, and yet now, the very people who had doubted her were witnessing its truth. The feeling was intoxicating, freeing, and humbling all at once. She was no longer just a waitress in the eyes of these people. She was someone who could create beauty, someone who could move hearts with her talent. The melody shifted again, moving into a softer, more reflective tone. She allowed herself to let the music linger on tender notes, giving it room to breathe, giving the audience time to absorb it. She noticed the young group leaning closer, some resting their chins in their hands, mesmerized. The expressions on their faces had changed completely. The teasing and doubt had melted away, replaced by respect, curiosity, and an unspoken admiration. A few of the regular customers whispered to each other, exchanging soft smiles. The woman with the laptop murmured, "I didn't know she could play like that," while the elderly man nodded quietly, his eyes still closed, a faint tear glinting in the corner of his eye. The music had touched something universal, something deep and unspoken, connecting everyone in the room without the need for words. She began to feel a connection with her audience, even if they did not yet realize it. The music she played was no longer just for herself. It was for them too, a bridge between her world and theirs. She could feel the emotion she was conveying being absorbed, reflected, and returned in tiny gestures. The tilt of a head, the widening of eyes, the soft inhale of surprise and wonder. The young group began to change in small but noticeable ways. Their posture relaxed, their laughter had completely disappeared, and even the boy who had been the loudest at the beginning now sat quietly, mesmerized. Their earlier teasing had been replaced with a tentative appreciation, a recognition that they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. She did not need their approval, but the transformation was undeniable and added a warmth to the music she had not expected. She continued playing, feeling the narrative of the melody guide her. Each note was carefully chosen, each chord a reflection of her feelings, her hopes, her dreams. She allowed herself to play with abandon, exploring the full range of emotion that the piano could convey. The music rose and fell in waves, sometimes soft and delicate, sometimes bold and commanding, carrying the audience along on an unexpected journey. The cafe became a vessel for her expression. Every corner of the room, every person within it, seemed to resonate with the energy of the music. It was a rare magic, a moment that could not be manufactured, a connection that transcended ordinary interaction. The young group, the regulars, the staff, all of them were part of something larger, something created in real time by the simple act of letting music speak. She felt a rush of exhilaration. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a companion, a voice, an extension of herself. She realized that the hesitation, the fear, the years of doubt, they were all gone, replaced by an unstoppable force of expression. She could feel the room responding, note by note, chord by chord, as if the space itself were alive with the emotion she had released. The young group exchanged another set of quiet glances. One whispered softly, "I can't believe I doubted her." Another nodded, their eyes wide with sincerity. It's like the music is telling a story." The expressions on their faces were not only of admiration but also of a deeper understanding, an acknowledgement that appearances could be deceiving, that talent could reside in unexpected places. The melody began to shift once more, moving into a gentle, reflective section. She allowed herself to slow, to let each note linger, to let the silence between chords speak as loudly as the sound itself. The effect was powerful. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, caught in the pause, in the delicate beauty of the music. Even the young group leaned in slightly, as if drawn closer by the quiet intimacy of the moment. Her heart swelled with a sense of fulfillment and liberation. She had taken a risk, faced doubt, and chosen to reveal her talent. And in doing so, she had created a moment of genuine human connection. The music had lifted the spirits of those who had mocked her, transformed skepticism into admiration, and reminded everyone in the room of the beauty that could exist in unexpected places. By the time she reached the final notes, the cafe was quiet, the atmosphere thick with emotion. The young group sat in stunned silence, their previous expressions of amusement replaced with awe. The regulars looked around at each other, sharing small smiles, quietly acknowledging the impact of what they had just heard. Even the staff seemed to feel it, a shared experience that had touched everyone in a personal and profound way. She lifted her hands from the keys, letting the last note resonate fully before fading into silence. The moment was complete, a delicate pause in the rhythm of the day, and yet it felt monumental. She looked up briefly, seeing the young group staring at her with wide eyes, some of them whispering to each other, others simply absorbing the unexpected transformation. For her, the experience was a revelation. She had always loved music, but today she had discovered its true power, the ability to touch hearts, shift perceptions, and lift spirits. The piano had allowed her to speak without words, to share a part of herself that had been hidden, and in doing so, she had created something unforgettable. The cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but it was different now. The air felt lighter, the sunlight warmer, the atmosphere charged with the memory of the music that had just been played. She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet exhilaration. The young group, once mocking and dismissive, had been transformed, and so had she. The piano had done more than play a melody. It had bridged the gap between doubt and understanding, between fear and courage, between ordinary moments and extraordinary connection. The last note lingered in the air, soft and shimmering, before fading into the quiet hum of the cafe. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness, as if the room itself were holding its breath, savoring the echoes of the music. The young group who had once sneered and laughed now sat motionless, their expressions frozen in awe. The teasing had vanished completely, replaced by an undeniable respect. They had come expecting amusement, but they had received something far more powerful, an experience that moved them deeply without a single word. She lowered her hands from the piano slowly, her fingers brushing the polished keys one last time. The familiar warmth of the wood seemed to reassure her, a quiet acknowledgement that the music had been shared, that the risk she had taken had been worthwhile. Her heart still raced with excitement and relief, but it was no longer tied to fear. It was tied to joy, to pride, to the incredible realization that her gift had touched the people around her in a way she had never dared to imagine. The cafe remained quiet for a heartbeat longer, each person caught in their own reaction. The elderly man opened his eyes and smiled, nodding gently as if in silent congratulations. The woman who had been working on her laptop looked up, a soft awe in her gaze, and whispered, almost to herself, "That was beautiful." Other customers, some new and some regulars, exchanged small glances, unsure how to express what they felt but understanding the change in the room's energy. The young group was the last to break the silence. One of them, the one who had first mocked her, let out a soft, almost embarrassed laugh. It wasn't mocking. It was a laugh of surprise, of amazement at their own misjudgment. Another whispered, "I didn't think she could play like that." They avoided looking directly at her for a moment, perhaps unsure how to respond, but their body language had shifted. Their initial arrogance had been replaced by a genuine, quiet respect, a recognition that they had underestimated someone entirely. One of them finally spoke, voice low and hesitant. "I didn't mean to doubt you. That was incredible." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The apology was unnecessary, but it mattered to her in a small, human way. She smiled softly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not pride. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about the connection they had shared through the music. The melody had conveyed what words could not, and now their reaction confirmed that it had reached them fully. The young group leaned back in their chairs, absorbing the final moments of the performance. They whispered quietly among themselves, their earlier laughter and snickering replaced by thoughtful murmurs and nods. One said softly, "I can't believe I judged her so quickly. She's amazing." Another added, "I never expected to feel this way about someone just sitting at a piano in a cafe." They were quiet, humbled in a way that was almost tangible. She watched them for a moment, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and relief. The transformation in their expressions, their body language, their very presence had shifted completely. The music had done more than entertain. It had opened their minds, softened their hearts, and replaced arrogance with admiration. She realized that moments like these, rare and fleeting, were what made her love music so deeply. It had power, could change perceptions, could bridge divides. The regular customers also began to react, softly clapping, murmuring gentle words of praise. Even those who had only been half aware of what was happening now seemed drawn in, responding instinctively to the beauty of the performance. A woman sipping tea smiled warmly at her, nodding slightly, while the man reading his newspaper quietly folded it and placed it aside. Small gestures but meaningful acknowledgement from people who had witnessed something extraordinary. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, letting the joy and relief wash over her. The music had lifted the spirits of everyone in the room, not in a dramatic or forced way, but gently, naturally. She had shared a part of herself that had been hidden for years, and in return, the room had responded with understanding, respect, and admiration. It was a quiet triumph, subtle yet profound, and it filled her with a warmth that spread from her chest outward. The young group, once loud and dismissive, now sat together in quiet conversation. They whispered softly, sharing their amazement, their voices hushed in reverence. One of them finally spoke aloud, turning to the others. "I think we should have been listening, not mocking. She's got something real, something that moves people." Another nodded in agreement, their eyes still fixed on the piano, on her, on the space where the music had poured from her hands. She could sense the shift in the cafe, the subtle change in energy that comes when something unexpected and genuine touches people's hearts. The teasing and snickering had vanished, replaced by curiosity, admiration, and quiet reflection. People were no longer focused on her role as a waitress or on her quiet demeanor. They were focused on her talent, on the music, on the way it had made them feel. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, still aware of their warmth and texture. She didn't feel the need to speak, to explain, to defend herself. The music had spoken for her, and it had been heard. That was enough. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. Not just noticed, not just acknowledged, but understood in a small, intimate way through the language of sound. The young group began to relax further, their earlier tension replaced by reflection. They shifted in their seats, leaning back slowly, quietly processing what had happened. The boy who had first mocked her now seemed humbled, thoughtful, his gaze lingering on the piano as if searching for the source of the magic. The others nodded subtly, a silent agreement passing between them that something remarkable had occurred. The cafe itself seemed to breathe a little differently. The usual hum of conversation and the clinking of cups returned gradually, but it was softer, tempered by the lingering resonance of the music. The air felt lighter, warmer, almost charged with the memory of what had just happened. Customers moved through the space with quiet smiles, sharing small glances of understanding, a recognition of the unexpected beauty they had witnessed. She felt a quiet sense of pride, not in a boastful way, but in a deeply human, fulfilling sense. She had faced doubt, uncertainty, and the potential for embarrassment, and she had chosen to play anyway. The music had carried her courage into the hearts of others, changing perceptions, lifting spirits, and leaving an impression that could not be erased. She realized that moments like this were rare, but they were powerful. They reminded her why she had devoted herself to music in the first place. One of the young group finally approached her, voice tentative but sincere. I didn't mean to be rude. That was incredible." She nodded gently, acknowledging the words without making a show of it. She didn't need their praise, but she accepted it quietly, appreciating the sincerity behind it. The interaction was simple, human, and meaningful, another confirmation that the music had bridged the gap between them. The rest of the group murmured their agreement, each expressing their admiration in small, understated ways. They had come expecting entertainment at her expense, but they had found themselves witnesses to something moving, authentic, and transformative. The shift in their attitude was subtle but profound, a testament to the power of genuine talent and the vulnerability it had taken for her to reveal it. She noticed the regular customers exchanging small smiles, some nodding quietly to each other. The woman with the laptop whispered softly, "I never imagined," and then trailed off, unable to find the words. The elderly man simply smiled, eyes twinkling, as if recalling a memory stirred by the music. Each reaction, however small, reinforced the impact of the moment and deepened her sense of fulfillment. The young group lingered for a moment longer, still processing the performance. They whispered quietly, their voices carrying a mixture of surprise, admiration, and reflection. One finally said, "We judged her too quickly. She really is talented." Another nodded, adding, "It's amazing how something so simple can make you feel so much." Their words, soft and unassuming, carried an authenticity that warmed her heart. The music had not only lifted their spirits but had also reminded them of a larger truth, that people are often more than what they appear to be, that talent and beauty can reside in unexpected places, and that assumptions are easily misleading. The transformation in their attitude, subtle but complete, was a testament to the quiet power of art, of expression, of human connection. She took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction settle within her. The piano still hummed softly beneath her hands, a gentle reminder of the moment that had just passed, of the courage it had taken, and of the bridge it had created between her and the people around her. She realized that this was only the beginning, not the end, of what she could do with her music, and the thought filled her with anticipation and hope. The young group finally rose from their chairs, their earlier arrogance completely replaced with quiet respect. One approached her again, voice low but sincere. "Thank you. That was something I'll never forget." The others nodded in agreement, some offering small smiles, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the depth of what they had just witnessed. The acknowledgement was quiet but genuine, and it resonated with her deeply. As they left the cafe, she watched them go, noticing the subtle changes in their demeanor. They moved with a quiet contemplation, their laughter gone, replaced by reflection. They had come expecting amusement, maybe even a moment of ridicule, but they left with a memory of beauty, of vulnerability, and of the unexpected power of music. The transformation in their spirits was undeniable, and it left her with a profound sense of accomplishment and joy. She returned her attention to the piano, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys. The warmth of the wood, the gentle hum that remained in the air, and the memory of the music that had just been played reminded her of the gift she had shared and the impact it had made. It was a quiet human triumph, a moment of connection, understanding, and unspoken gratitude that lingered long after the last note had faded. The cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the gentle hum of conversation and the occasional clink of cups resuming as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for her, nothing felt normal anymore. The day had changed everything, even if subtly. She moved through the cafe with a quiet confidence, a soft smile on her face, aware that something inside her had shifted permanently. The music she had shared earlier had done more than lift the spirits of others. It had lifted hers as well. She carried on with her work, refilling cups and clearing tables, yet every step felt lighter. The nervous tension that had weighed on her for years had eased, replaced by a quiet courage she hadn't known she possessed. She glanced at the piano, polished and gleaming in the sunlight, and felt a wave of gratitude. It had been her companion in private for so long, and now it had helped her connect with the world around her. The young group who had once mocked her had left, but the impression of their presence lingered. She could still feel the subtle energy shift they had carried into the room, the way their laughter had transformed into genuine appreciation. Even if they didn't understand the depth of the music fully, she knew that the experience had left a mark. People often underestimated others, she thought, not realizing the hidden layers of talent and emotion within them. Today had proven that assumptions could be completely wrong. A few regular customers approached her, offering small words of encouragement and quiet admiration. One of them said, "You have a gift. Thank you for sharing it." Another smiled warmly, nodding, "That was beautiful. It really made my day." She accepted their compliments with humility, feeling the sincerity behind each word. It wasn't the praise that mattered most, though. It was the connection, the acknowledgement that her music had touched someone's heart. The cafe itself seemed to hum differently now. The sunlight streaming through the windows looked warmer, brighter, as if reflecting the change in energy. The aroma of coffee and baked goods mingled with a lingering sense of joy and awe. People moved more slowly, taking in the atmosphere with a newfound appreciation. Even the staff behind the counter seemed affected, carrying themselves with a quiet pride, as if they too had witnessed something extraordinary. She returned to the piano after completing her tasks, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys. The instrument had been silent for a while, yet it seemed to hum softly, waiting for her touch again. She didn't play immediately. Instead, she allowed herself to sit there for a few moments, reflecting on what had happened. The experience had been transformative not just for the audience but for her as well. She realized that courage and vulnerability could create powerful connections, even with strangers. The thought lingered in her mind. Music was more than notes and rhythm. It was a language that reached beyond words, beyond appearances, beyond expectations. It was a way to share pieces of oneself without fear of judgment. She had always known this privately, in the quiet moments when she practiced alone. But today had shown her that this truth could extend into the world, touching others and transforming the ordinary into something extraordinary. A small smile appeared on her face as she remembered the reactions of the young group. Their initial disbelief and teasing had turned into genuine awe. She hadn't expected them to change so quickly, and yet they had. It reminded her that people often respond deeply to authenticity, even if they try to hide it behind humor or skepticism. The moment had been fleeting, but its impact was lasting. She thought about her life before today, about the quiet routines of the cafe, the endless repetition of serving coffee and clearing tables, the sense that her dreams might always remain private. There had been a comfort in the routine, certainly, but it had been paired with a longing, a quiet desire for something more. Today had broken through that monotony, giving her a glimpse of what could happen when she dared to share her true self. Her hands rested on the keys again, and she began to play softly, a gentle melody that filled the small cafe. This time she played not for anyone else, but for herself. The notes were tender, reflective, and joyful, carrying the weight of her emotions into the air. She felt free, liberated from the constraints of fear and self-doubt. The music flowed naturally, as it always had, but now it carried a new confidence, a quiet assurance that she belonged not just behind the counter, but wherever her talent and heart could take her. Customers passing by the piano paused, some offering small smiles, others simply absorbing the music as they moved through the cafe. The atmosphere was different now, quieter and more attentive, yet relaxed. People didn't just hear the notes, they felt them. They sensed the story behind the melody, the years of practice, the courage it had taken to play publicly for the first time. The room seemed to hold its breath with each chord, caught in the beauty of a moment that was both intimate and universal. She played for a long time, letting the music rise and fall, exploring its depth and emotion. Each note carried a memory, a feeling, a quiet part of her soul. She allowed herself to feel everything. The nervousness that had come before, the thrill of courage, the joy of connection, and the satisfaction of being truly seen. Music had always been her escape, her companion, her confidant. Now it was also her voice, her bridge to the world, a way to touch lives without speaking. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, a sense of calm settled over her. The cafe had returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of the music lingered, weaving through the space and leaving a subtle mark on everyone who had been present. The young group had gone, the regulars had returned to their routines, yet the moment was preserved in the quiet smiles and lingering thoughts of those who had experienced it. She realized that her life had changed, not in a dramatic or sudden way, but in the small, profound shifts that mattered most. She felt more confident, more connected, more aware of her own value. The music had lifted spirits, yes, but it had also lifted hers. The courage she had discovered today would stay with her, guiding her through ordinary days, quiet moments, and unexpected opportunities. Over the following weeks, the cafe took on a slightly different atmosphere. Customers who had witnessed her performance began to ask quietly if she would play again. Some returned specifically to hear the music, drawn by the memory of that day and the emotional connection they had felt. The young group who had once teased her came back a few times, this time respectful and attentive, quietly observing as she played. their laughter replaced by appreciation. She found herself playing more often, allowing the music to fill the space during slow mornings and quiet afternoons. Each performance was unique, shaped by her mood, her emotions, and the subtle energy of the room. The cafe became a place not just for coffee and conversation, but for shared human experience, where strangers could connect through the power of music. With each note she played, she grew more confident. She began to recognize her own courage and the impact of her actions. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and fear, and had chosen to express herself fully. The results had been transformative not just for her audience, but for her own understanding of what she could achieve. Music had given her a voice, a way to share her story, and a path to connect with others in ways she had never imagined. The young group eventually became regular visitors, not out of mockery but out of admiration. They listened quietly, often exchanging soft smiles and whispers among themselves, clearly touched by her talent and sincerity. The cafe's other patrons also responded positively, offering small words of encouragement, subtle applause, and requests for more music. The atmosphere had shifted permanently, becoming warmer, more inviting, and deeply human. She reflected on the lessons of that day, the courage to reveal her true self, the power of vulnerability, the unexpected impact of sharing talent with others. She realized that human connection often arises from moments of authenticity, from acts of bravery that seem small but carry enormous weight. She had discovered that even the simplest gesture, sitting at a piano and playing, could create ripples that reached far beyond the immediate moment. Her life continued, with the rhythm of the cafe and the steady pace of her daily routine, but she carried the memory of that day like a quiet flame. It reminded her of her own strength, her ability to touch others, and the importance of embracing opportunities even when they felt frightening or uncertain. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and doubted, yet she had chosen to play, and in doing so, she had changed the lives of those who had been present, and changed her own life as well. The piano remained a central part of her life, no longer just a private companion but a bridge to the wider world. Each note she played was a reminder of courage, of authenticity, and of the power of sharing one's gift. The music had lifted spirits in that small cafe, had transformed skepticism into admiration, and had reminded everyone present that beauty and talent could reside in the most unexpected places. She understood now that the moment was not just about her performance, but about the human connections it fostered, the way music could soften hearts, open minds, and create understanding between strangers. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a guiding principle for the rest of her life. Courage and authenticity could change everything, even in small, ordinary places like a corner cafe. And so she continued, playing her music, sharing her gift, and lifting the spirits of those around her. Each day brought new faces, new listeners, and new opportunities to connect through the language of sound. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a tool for human connection, a channel for expression, and a reminder that one person, even a quiet waitress, could make a difference in ways that mattered deeply and forever. Her life had changed in ways she could not have predicted. She had found courage, discovered the power of her own voice, and realized that the world was ready for her music, even if it had doubted her at first. And as she sat at the piano, fingers poised over the keys, she knew that each note played was not just music. It was a gift, a bridge, a small miracle that had the power to lift spirits, transform hearts, and change lives, one melody at a time.